The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet streets as General Amara Simmons drove home. She had just wrapped up a long day at the Pentagon, a routine meeting with colleagues. The weight of her rank never felt burdensome. After all, she had earned it. She was a general, a leader in the U.S. Army, someone who had spent years fighting for her place in a world dominated by others who still didn't understand what it meant to earn your spot. As she cruised down the familiar road, she didn't think much of the dark sedan that had been following her for the past few blocks. The quiet hum of her car filled the space between her thoughts. She checked her rearview mirror once, twice, then dismissed it. Who was she kidding? Maybe it was just another driver on the road, like everyone else. But then something changed. The sedan pulled up closer, its headlights cutting through the growing evening gloom. Her pulse quickened, just a flicker of unease. It was only when she heard the sirens that the true weight of the situation hit her. The flashing lights in her rearview mirror seemed to blur all of a sudden. Red, blue, red, blue. A traffic stop. She sighed, pulling over to the side of the road. Routine. That's what she told herself. A normal stop. She rolled down the window, expecting the usual questions, a license check, maybe a warning. What she wasn't prepared for was the officer's face, twisted with disdain, his eyes narrowing when he saw her. The officer stood tall, his stance rigid, as though he was expecting something more than the usual stop. License and registration. He barked, voice harsh and sharp. No pleasantries, just demand. General Simmons, she said calmly, her voice unwavering despite the slight tightening in her chest. I'm a general in the U.S. Army. But before she could say more, the officer scoffed and shook his head. His partner, standing off to the side, was already watching her, eyes scanning her with disrespect she had long grown accustomed to in her life. You think you're above the law, General? The officer sneered, leaning in close to her window. The smell of alcohol lingered on his breath. You don't get special treatment just cause you wear that uniform. Confusion flashed in her mind. What was going on here? She had dealt with plenty of traffic stops before, but this felt different. The officer's demeanor wasn't professional. It wasn't about law or procedure. It was personal. Step out of the car, the officer ordered, ignoring her rank altogether. Her mind raced, and a chill crawled down her spine. This wasn't supposed to be happening. She had a right to be treated with respect. She had earned that respect. Still, she did as instructed, stepping out of the car, maintaining her composure. She was a general, after all. No one, not even these officers, could take that away from her. But the officers didn't stop there. As she stepped out of the vehicle, they grabbed her with rough hands, forcing her arms behind her back as one slapped a pair of handcuffs on her. She tried to stand tall, even as the harsh grip dug into her wrists. What do you think you're doing, General? One of the officers hissed in her ear, his breath hot and foul. You think calling the Pentagon is going to save you? He yanked the cuffs tighter, making her wince. She couldn't believe it. She was a high-ranking officer in the military, not a criminal. And yet, here she was being treated like one. The humiliation burned through her veins like fire, but she bit down on it. She would not let them see her break. But the officers didn't stop there. The second officer, the one who had been standing by, took a step forward, grinning like this was some sick joke. He spat directly at her face, the saliva landing on her cheek, a reminder of the contempt they held for her. Just another black woman who thinks she's too good for us, the officer sneered, his voice thick with racial hatred. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Her body tensed. The sting of the spit mixed with the rage bubbling within her. She was done playing nice. She would not let them get away with this. She had to act. Her fingers shook as she reached for her phone. Her military training kicked in, and in the chaos, she kept her focus. She called the Pentagon. Her voice was steady when she spoke, even as the officers continued to taunt her, laughing at the thought of a little call being her salvation. I'm General Amara Simmons, she said calmly into the phone. I've been detained illegally. Get someone here now. She could feel the weight of the call as soon as she hung up. The officers hadn't noticed the shift. They still thought they had the upper hand. They continued mocking her, calling her delusional, and telling her that nothing would save her. One of the officers kicked her, sending pain shooting through her side. He leaned in closer, a sick smile spreading across his face. "What's your military rank gonna do for you now, huh? You're still a criminal in our eyes." But as the last words left his lips, the officers stopped. Their laughter died. The call had gone through. They didn't know yet, but the world was about to change. They had no idea what was coming for them. The officers froze, their faces turning pale as they realized who they had just brutalized. A general. Their minds raced, trying to grasp the severity of their mistake. But it was too late. The damage was already done. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Would you stay calm and collected, or would you snap under the pressure? How do you think the officers will face the consequences of their actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. This is just the beginning, and the storm is coming. The officers were still laughing, their voices loud and brash, believing they had won. Their taunts and mocking words hung in the air, thick with contempt. The general stood there, handcuffed, her head held high, the bruises from their violence already starting to show on her skin, but they didn't seem to care. You really think you're going to get away with this call, huh? Your little military rank isn't going to save you here. The officer sneered as he wiped his mouth, mocking her. "What's your rank going to do for you, General? You're still just a criminal in our eyes," the second officer added, the laughter still rolling off his tongue, as though it was all just a joke. Amara's mind raced with every insult, every cruel word. She had heard it all before. The racism, the dehumanization, the toxic environment that seemed to plague every room she entered. But today felt different. Today, she wasn't just a black woman trying to survive in a hostile world. She was someone they had underestimated. Through the haze of pain and humiliation, something shifted in her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the ugly truths of a system that had let this happen. Her call to the Pentagon had been the first move, and now she could feel it, the shift in the air. The storm was coming. The screech of tires cut through the mocking laughter and cruel jabs. In an instant, the officers stopped talking, their eyes darting toward the noise. A convoy of black SUVs came to a halt, their engines purring as the doors swung open. The air felt thick with tension as the Pentagon security team poured out. Military personnel, highly trained and organized, stepped onto the scene with a precision that only comes from years of battle readiness. They moved like a battalion, no hesitation, no second guessing. Their uniforms were spotless, their faces hard as stone. This wasn't just a response. This was a commanding presence. In the distance, General Simmons' superior officer emerged from one of the SUVs, flanked by several armed guards. Their arrival was swift, their every movement carrying an unmistakable sense of purpose. There was no mistaking it. The Pentagon was here to take control, and there was no space left for the officers to operate. At first, the officers still tried to laugh it off. Their arrogance blinded them to the reality of what was happening. They tried to ignore the convoy, thinking they could intimidate Amara into submission. But the moment General Simmons' superior officer made his way to the front, something changed in the air. The officers froze, their faces suddenly drained of color. The arrogance that had clouded their judgment moments ago was gone, replaced by something they had never expected. Fear. It wasn't just the officers who were staring now. The press had arrived, the cameras rolling, capturing every moment as the Pentagon team closed in. No one could ignore the growing crowd that gathered. They had witnessed it. The officers had crossed a line they could never erase. The officers' stuttering excuses didn't matter anymore. They could see it on the faces of the Pentagon officials. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was a confrontation they couldn't escape. One of the lead Pentagon officers stepped forward, his boots echoing in the stillness as he approached the two officers. His presence was commanding, his eyes piercing. He didn't need to say anything to establish control. You thought you could degrade a general, make a mockery of the uniform, and get away with it? The officer's voice was low, but there was an authority behind it that left no room for argument. The officers tried to justify themselves, their voices shaking with the weight of what they knew was happening. They stammered, trying to cling to the lie they had spun, that Amara had been the one in the wrong, that they were justified in their actions. But the Pentagon officer wasn't having it. "You have no idea what you've done." He stepped closer to one of the officers, his face hardening. "The system doesn't tolerate people like you. It doesn't protect people who abuse their power and treat others like they're beneath them." The officer's attempts at defense quickly fell apart. Every word they tried to utter was drowned out by the mounting pressure of the Pentagon's response. The realization hit them with the force of a tidal wave. They had overestimated their power, and now they were facing consequences that no one in their position could have imagined. The Pentagon team wasted no time. They moved in with the precision of an elite military operation, quickly and efficiently detaining the officers, taking them into custody. Their hands were bound, their faces pale with the dawning horror of what they had done. The officers were shoved into their own police car, unable to hide their fear as the Pentagon team surrounded them. There was no room for excuses, no space for pretending. The Pentagon had arrived, and their judgment had been swift. As the officers were loaded into the car, their world crumbled before their eyes. They had been caught in their own lies. The body camera footage, the witness accounts, and the undeniable truth of their actions had exposed them for who they truly were. Nothing could save them now. The general superior officer stood nearby, watching as the officers were taken away. He turned to the press, his expression cold. "We are investigating this matter thoroughly. The officers involved will face the consequences of their actions. This kind of behavior has no place in law enforcement, or in any institution that serves the people," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Amara stood on the side, still handcuffed but resolute. She had been humiliated. She had been physically assaulted. But as she watched the Pentagon team take control, she felt something inside her stir. Strength. Her resolve was like iron now. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her call had ignited something. It had sent a shockwave that couldn't be undone. Her strength had brought the storm, and now the officers were paying the price. Amara straightened her back as the Pentagon team led her toward one of the vehicles. Despite the bruises, despite the pain still coursing through her body, she stood tall. She was a general, and she had made the right call. As the officers were driven away, their faces full of fear, Amara looked around at the officials who had come to her aid. This was what power looked like. This was justice. She knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of victory on her shoulders. The officers, their careers shattered, were now in custody. Their world had come crashing down. Their lies had been exposed, their actions irredeemable. They would never be able to hide from the truth again. But General Simmons knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The battle for justice was far from over, and she was ready to lead the charge. As the vehicles pulled away, the cameras still rolling, she couldn't help but wonder, how many more were out there? How many more would be silenced by the same system that had failed her and so many others for so long? Her victory felt bittersweet, but it was a victory nonetheless. What do you think of the officers' downfall? Were they ever really in control, or did they underestimate the power of a woman they tried to silence? How far would you go to fight for justice when the world seems stacked against you? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe. The story isn't over yet. The fight for justice has only just begun. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what happens next. The news broke across every major outlet. 2 police officers have been arrested for the brutal assault of General Amara Simmons. They have been taken into custody, their careers and lives hanging by a thread. And yet, the aftermath was just beginning. The officers had once walked with an air of untouchable authority, the very embodiment of power in their community. But now, their world was crashing down around them. The moment their faces hit the headlines, they were no longer the respected officers they had once been. They were now public enemies, their names forever linked to the brutal assault on a high-ranking black woman officer. The media coverage was unforgiving, each newspaper headline more damning than the last. Racist cops attack general in brutal assault, law enforcement's dirty secret. Officers abuse military general, systemic racism unveiled. Officers who abused power facing justice. The press didn't stop there. Their faces, now infamous, were plastered across TV screens, social media feeds, and news websites. The very same power they once abused was now working against them. They had once prided themselves on their positions in law enforcement, but now they were pariahs, the embodiment of everything wrong with a system that allowed abuse of power to thrive. The phone calls from their families stopped, their friends distanced themselves, and the police department, once their sanctuary, now turned its back on them. The officers were no longer seen as defenders of the law. They were viewed as criminals who had betrayed the very system they had sworn to uphold. Their colleagues, those who once stood beside them, now avoided eye contact, refusing to speak out in their defense. Their arrogance had cost them everything. They were taken to separate holding cells, alone and isolated, as the world turned against them. They had no one left. The system they had so blindly trusted, the power they thought they could wield, had suddenly become their greatest enemy. A few weeks later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed with onlookers, the media cameras flashing, capturing every moment. Activists, civil rights leaders, and even military personnel were present, all eager to see justice served. The world watched as the officers were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. General Simmons sat in the front row, her face composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her body had healed, but the emotional scars from that day, the humiliation, the pain, the fear, still lingered. Yet, as she looked up at the officers standing before the judge, she felt a surge of pride. This moment wasn't just for her. It was for every black person who had ever been targeted because of their race. It was for every woman who had been belittled or underestimated. It was for the countless voices that had been silenced by the system. The officers took the stand, their faces pale, their bodies stiff. They tried to defend themselves, but their excuses quickly fell flat. They claimed they had acted out of fear, out of protocol, that they had seen General Simmons as a threat. But the prosecution was relentless. The body cam footage, witness testimonies, and physical evidence told a very different story. They showed a brutal assault, 2 officers, one of whom had spit in a general's face, calling her derogatory names, and treating her like a criminal. None of their excuses mattered. And then came General Simmons' testimony. When it was her turn to speak, the room fell silent. Her voice, strong and unwavering, echoed through the courtroom as she recounted every detail of the assault. She spoke not just for herself, but for every person who had been racially profiled, every woman who had been dismissed because of her gender, and every person of color who had been abused by a system that failed to protect them. "I was treated like a criminal," she said, her words carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. "I was humiliated, spat on, beaten, and disrespected, simply because I am a black woman. I have served my country with honor and dignity. Yet in that moment, they saw me as nothing more than an object to be controlled." As she spoke, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Her words struck the core of everyone present. It wasn't just about what happened to her. It was about the unseen struggles that people like her had to endure every day. And in that moment, the officers who had assaulted her finally began to understand the enormity of what they had done. The defense attorney tried to intervene, offering flimsy arguments about miscommunication and misunderstanding, but the prosecution tore them apart. The truth was undeniable. These officers had abused their power. They had acted out of racism and misogyny, targeting a woman of power simply because they thought they could get away with it. The public, the jury, and even the judge could see it. There was no question in anyone's mind that the officers were guilty. The defense had no leg to stand on. The general's strength, her courage in the face of everything they had done, had turned the tide in favor of justice. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge delivered his verdict. The room went quiet as he spoke the words that would change everything for the officers. Guilty. The officer who had spit on General Simmons and relentlessly assaulted her was sentenced to the maximum prison term for his crimes. His partner, who had participated in the abuse, received a lesser sentence, but still faced years behind bars. "You've abused your power," the judge continued. "You've degraded the very institution you swore to serve. This court will not stand for that. The law is meant to protect, not oppress. There was no joy in the room as the verdict was announced. The relief was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it came at a steep price. 2 lives were destroyed. 2 men who had once been seen as pillars of their community were now nothing more than criminals, their careers and reputations shattered beyond repair. The courtroom erupted in applause, but General Simmons remained stoic, her face calm and dignified. This wasn't a moment of celebration for her. This was just the beginning of a much larger fight. As the officers were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the reality of their fall from grace hit them hard. They were no longer the heroes they once believed themselves to be. They were pariahs, despised by those who had once respected them. Their families, friends, and colleagues had all turned their backs on them. The community they had once served now saw them for what they truly were: abusers of power, fueled by hatred and prejudice. Their homes were abandoned by neighbors, their phones filled with hateful messages and threats. Their names, once spoken with pride, were now cursed by everyone they knew. The police department, their last remaining sanctuary, had distanced itself from them completely. The institution they had once sworn to protect had turned its back, abandoning them in their time of need. They had lost everything, and it was all their fault. As she left the courtroom, General Simmons felt the weight of the moment. She had won, but the victory was bittersweet. She had exposed the officers for what they were, but she also knew that this was just a small victory in a long, hard battle. The fight for justice was far from over. She had spoken out, and in doing so, she had become a voice for so many who had been silenced. But how many more battles were there to fight? How many more people would be subjected to the same cruelty, the same injustice? This isn't over, she whispered to herself as she walked away from the courthouse. This is just the beginning. Justice had been served today. But General Simmons knew that this was just one part of the larger battle. The fight for equality and racial justice wasn't something that could be solved in a courtroom. It was a long road ahead, and she was just getting started. How do you think justice will be served in the future? Do you think General Simmons' victory is just the beginning? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more entertaining stories on social injustice and racial discrimination. Stay tuned. The battle for justice has just begun, and the world needs more people who will stand up and fight for what's right.